In the Anglosphere, we're lucky because rather than just being one country and one nation separate from others in the world, we have a handful of other sister countries full of people who are related to us through ties of blood, history, and culture. And so if you're an American, you can travel all the way across the world. You can go to New Zealand or Australia. You can go north to Canada. You can cross over the Atlantic and go to Great Britain. There are these other countries where you can just show up and talk to these people, and you have much more in common with them and are probably related to them to a great extent, more so than many other places in the world, even in Europe. And so it behooves us to pay attention to what's going on in these countries, in particular to the nationalist and right-wing communities in those countries. Might save you some legwork and keep you from having to reinvent the wheel. And another important thing is that every nation, every people, through its blood and its history, has a certain character and certain proclivities. And so if what we're trying to do is to figure out a new political system and a new social order that will suit us and will get rid of our complete social degeneration, then you have to look at these other countries and see what we have in common. And what we all have in common, where we don't differ, that's going to tell you something about our innate character. And it seems to me like rather than coming up with castles in the sky and just musing about what is the utopia, what is the perfect social order, it's probably better to look in and figure out who we are and then try to implement something that reflects our character. That's the only thing that's going to work long term. And that's why, unfortunately to the utopians, trying to implement from the outside certain social orders on people across the world doesn't work. Colonialism did not work in any sense, right? In terms of spreading so-called civilization, because all of the colonial nations of the world just have fundamentally different characters than the European. And I'm not trying to make a supremacist argument, I'm just saying that the national characters are different. So to the degree that the Chinese, for instance, were colonially subjugated by Europe, they have now adopted large parts of Western technology and Western ways, but they're still fundamentally Chinese, and there are some things that they will never adopt. And so this is part of the tyranny, the intellectual tyranny of the Western neoliberal order, in that they come up with these lists of how countries ought to be behaving. You ought to have these 10 criteria, and then they say, well, China or Russia or Malaysia or Egypt they only have 2 or 3 or 4 of these things, and therefore they have failed. This is our enemy. This is who we're fighting against. Nationalists don't want to do this. Nationalists want to look inward, turn inward, and figure out how we can become the people that we can be and that we're destined to be by Providence. And so these are the conversations that I think are helpful, and this is why we need to look at each other in the Anglosphere and figure out who we are and who we can become. Now, trying to do this, to do this, I pay attention to the extent that I can to right-wing and nationalist conversations coming out of the other countries in the Anglosphere. And it's easy because you don't have to translate it. You already know the language. And so I had been listening for a while, off and on, to a series of, like roundtable conversations that are put on by a guy named Brutus the Saxon. And I haven't listened to all of them, and I only found them, 5 or 6 months ago. But in my notifications, I saw that there was something from this guy about Winston Churchill. Pardon me. And I didn't see the prior conversation, but what he was doing in this video I watched or listened to was that he was defending himself for his claim that Britons should appropriate Winston Churchill as a nationalist symbol, and that this will make them popular, get them closer to implementing the policies that they want. And I could not disagree more. Could not. I disagree with the notion of promoting Churchill. I disagree with the notion of appropriating the Western neoliberal globalist heroes for ourselves. And thirdly, I disagree with the notion of being pragmatic. All right? Nationalists and right-wingers cannot afford to be pragmatic in this world. All right? Because this world is run by globalism, neoliberalism, and every other filthy ideology that's currently causing the social degradation and the destruction of our people. And so to the extent that you become more popular, okay, by adopting... I'm sorry, my video's messing up. I gotta stop this and I'll be right back. So to the extent that you are trying to become popular by adopting positions that are in line with people's current state of mind, you're destroying yourself, okay? The way that we have to think about the mass public is that their minds have been colonized by a hostile and destructive ideology. This is totally obvious when you look at birth rates, which are down. You look at suicide rates, which are up. You look at drug use, which is up. You look at pornography, which is up. You look at marriages, which are down, okay? When you talk to your local community leaders, you will find that they are basically lacking ideology in general. They don't know anything about politics, history, society, or economics. They are merely regurgitating the talking points that they get from the elites. So explain to me, if you could, and it's not possible, I know, how moving yourself towards this intellectual vacuum will help you succeed. No. What we've got to do is to try to offer something to these people that they know is closer to what is healthy and correct and proper for them. So that's what I have to say about that. Now, about the factual matters of Winston Churchill, you could go to Radio Albion and you could listen to Sven Longshanks and Dennis Wise talk about the series that Dennis Wise is working on about Churchill. If you don't know some of the factual matters about the guy's life and career, but the idea of adopting Winston Churchill as a nationalist symbol, of appropriating him as a nationalist symbol, is sickening. It's absolutely sickening. The guy's entire career was spent basically sacrificing the blood of the British people for the gains of, guess who? A certain cabal of financiers and politically influential persons. A really good comparison, like I was talking about doing between these different countries, is to look at the career of Dwight Eisenhower in America. This guy was a low-level Army officer who never saw any action, I don't think, and spent most of his career pushing paper and almost got court-martialed. Now, when the Roosevelt administration knew that they were going to go to war against Hitler and to destroy Europe, they had to create a cabal of Army officers, generals, admirals, people who were going to be loyal to them and implement this program. So they found Dwight Eisenhower, and Bernard Baruch took him on as a protege. Now, despite having basically no frontline military experience and being totally unqualified for the position, Dwight Eisenhower was made Supreme Allied Commander. So in the Western theater of World War II, he was in charge of everything. He then, of course, used that position to kill several million Germans in his concentration camps after the war. He promoted the now widely recognized myth that there were extermination camps on German territory. So places like Buchenwald, if you go look at his writings, they're saying that places like Buchenwald had gas chambers, and that the Germans were executing hundreds of thousands of people there. Well, I can tell you now that no mainstream historian believes this. It was a total lie. It was a complete and utter lie. And Dwight Eisenhower was involved in that. He was involved in organizing that stuff and promoting it, and he's got quotes about it. I've got the biography his son wrote about him over there on my shelf, and it promotes all this stuff, and it's from his father's notes and memoirs. So this is the kind of person who was able to trade on his wartime prominence and become a nationalist symbol in America, even though during his presidency, Dwight Eisenhower was actually terribly soft on communism, soft on Reds, and protected them in all cases. And the true nationalists and right-wingers in America were very critical of Dwight Eisenhower for this behavior. And comparing him to Churchill, I don't know what Brutus is thinking, because the nationalists during World War II were jailed, were put in jail by Winston Churchill. They couldn't even promote nationalism at that time. Like Sven Longshanks pointed out, as soon as the British people got a chance, they voted this Winston Churchill guy out. Now, his legend was then built up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s by a concentrated media campaign to promote this guy as the greatest Briton who ever lived. And there are some really embarrassing comments that Brutus made on that video, which I've archived, and I'll put the link to below. He made a statement like, well, would you have preferred that the Germans won World War II? This kind of argument is juvenile. It's pathetic, okay? You could just as easily say that there didn't need to be a war, or that they could have made peace in late 1939 and October 1939 after the defeat of Poland. Hitler came to the negotiating table and he said, let's have a conference between France, Italy, UK, Russia, Germany. Let's all get around here together and we can figure out what to do. And it seemed to me like he was implying that they could even reestablish part of Poland as an independent state, but that Germany was going to annex the corridor, Danzig, and these other areas that were under discussion. And of course, the British War Party, and Churchill foremost among them, said absolutely not. We're going to sacrifice any amount of British lives, any of it's necessary. If you look at the failed raid on Dieppe, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Dieppe. It was a raid or a landing that the Allied forces tried to carry out in northern France. Complete failure. And Winston Churchill was one of the first people, or one of the most foremost people, to say, these British lives were lost for a good cause. So you're not a nationalist if you spend your entire career working on behalf of financiers who want to start wars to get your people killed, to destroy your own empire, and give up your position in the world, and have you locked into economic collapse and austerity for God knows how many years afterwards. So this idea, to sum this up, okay, if you're gonna pick somebody to be a symbol for your ideas or your movement, though that person has to have ideas or principles that are in line with your own. And you cannot give up your ideas and your principles to move closer to someone who's diametrically opposed to your ideas and principles just so that they can become your symbol. This thing is completely inverted. And it's a good example of why some people are impetuous, some people are high-spirited, and they really want to put themselves out there with new ideas, and maybe it's not a good idea, but then due to being high-spirited, they have to defend it. I don't know. But on this one, Brutus, you got to go back to the drawing board, and you got to think this one through, and you got to say to yourself, is there a future for British nationalism if it adopts the major principles and components of neoliberalism? Why don't you just become a one-nation Tory? Why not? Why not just go whole hog and become support the most diverse and non-English cabinet in British history. That would be popular, wouldn't it? It's in the news media. Or maybe it's not popular and it's simply something that people repeat because it's the only ideology that's out there. Maybe your job is to figure out how to break into that rather than how to adopt it yourself. Okay, thank you for your time.